broilers is the bird in the middle, because who knows distance runners that are muscly, right? They usually tend to be kind of, skinnier, versus the sprinters, which are, the muscle bound. So our initial work with this laser, we were just trying to keep performance the same and not lose any performance. But it turned out that with our first study in the Ross 308s, we found the birds were more active through week 6 of the study. We also found that the feed conversion was improved incredibly. And so we were thinking, okay, well, they're moving more, but somehow their feed conversion is also improved. So that's awesome, because we thought we would accidentally make birds that were smaller because they were exercising more. We found that their average daily gain was increased, especially in the finisher, which is probably the most important as far as final weight goes. But these all led us to then do further studies with the laser, because our goal was not, we wanted to have welfare improvements, but also we didn't want to have birds that were subsequently smaller as well. So something that we kind of discovered over time was we started moving into the Ross 708 line, and we were wondering if there was any changes to the breast meat quality, mostly because it is kind of a high impact cut on the bird. We saw that there was changes in weight and changes in FCR, and then the next question was where are those weight changes going? So we found that the breasts were larger in different ways, and I'll show you that data in a second. But we also found that the woody breast scores were redistributed in a positive way if the birds had laser exposure. So we had sought this extra dollar from the USDA, and we are now challenging ourselves basically to expand our welfare and our behavior-based measurements to understand how the birds are playing with the laser and how that affects overall performance. So we found we had some initial questions just from people that had read our original work, and they were wondering, well, how many birds in the pen are actually following and playing with the laser, and do the birds get bored with that laser over time? So we've got 2 different sets of data here. One is days 0 to 8, and then it's also shown to you on the right, panel B, by week. And we saw that birds played with the laser in the first week on the first and the second days the most, because it was the most novel, and that kind of reduced down to day 8. And then if we look over time, there is typically a very small percent that are actually interacting with the laser. But we weren't too concerned about that, because we found that anywhere from 20 to 60% of the pens with laser enrichment were moving because of those birds that were interacting with the laser. So we were influencing a lot of movement in the pens just because a few birds were interacting with the laser. So we thought that was pretty interesting. And one aspect of our work in the smaller pens is that the birds don't have as many places to go rest. So we were kind of interested to know if they wanted to rest, could they still rest? And the answer was yes. Not everybody was running around like a madman, because one crazy bird was very, very into that laser. So we thought that was pretty cool and also important, because we don't want to, force exercise. That's not our goal. But we found that even through week 6, birds were still interested in getting up and moving, maybe less so when they were chicks, but they were, still doing more activity. So in early this year, we completed our study where we lengthened the laser periods, and we were interested to know if the birds still kept moving over the 6-minute periods instead of the 4. And the answer is yes, they still do continue to move with the increased laser periods. The total percent moving based on day of life, so on the top left is 0 to 8, and on the bottom right is the weekly averages, but they still do move about the same as the birds with the shorter laser periods. And then my graduate student, Megan, and just a ton of undergrads did some really excellent work watching video, and they looked at each minute of the laser period, and they looked at the total percent of the birds moving. And basically we found that the birds don't really seem to get bored with the laser even through minute 6 of it being on. So this is through the first 8 days of life, and then this is through the first 7 weeks on a weekly basis. We thought that was kind of interesting because we thought, they'll be bored with it at some point, but they didn't seem to be in this case. Then we also had a question early on was, are the birds stressed by using the laser or seeing the laser? And what we found was that by drawing blood from birds week 5, 6, and 7, we found that the serum corticosterone was reduced in the birds that had the laser enrichment. There seems to be a bump at week 6, and we're not really sure why the overall cort would be higher, but we're still trying to kind of figure out the nuances of that. And again, I know serum cort is not the most perfect measurement, but we were just kind of interested in it as a measurement, and we did find a reduction based on laser enrichment. So if you kind of take the performance and the feed conversion, the fact that they're choosing to interact with the laser or not, and then the serum cort, I think we are kind of on the path of this is not a stressful thing for the birds. They can choose to play with it. The performance is telling you they're still eating and drinking equally to birds that are not laser enriched, and they're from the serum cort measurement, they're not stressed out by exposure to the laser enrichment. So where we're kind of going right now is the question of is like, how can we measure if birds think woody breast is painful? And we're kind of at the beginning of thinking about this because over the last 2 studies, we've seen a definite change in woody breast score distribution and the overall like normal, moderate, or severe based on whether or not they have laser enrichment. And in most cases, we see less severe woody breast scores because of the laser and more that are into the normal or moderate category at both day 42 and day 49. So we think that is just a really interesting outcome. And we're wondering if it has to do just with, the extra movement and how the muscle itself is developing or, keeping blood flow over time. So we're at the beginning of trying to understand, is woody breast painful? That's one of our questions that we would really like to answer. We were also interested for the last study, we did more measurements on the breast fillets. We were wondering if they weighed more or less. So we found that at day 42, they weighed significantly more. They were equal at day 49. But at day 49, we found that the breasts were taller in the laser enriched birds. And then at day 42, we found that they were wider. So we were wondering, how is our exercise changing some of the muscle physiology? Because we don't want to have a global change to the product in the end. But so these are some of the changes that we found based on the characteristics. So I'd like to thank all the students that are behind the data. Kristen, Megan, and Kayla, they're grad students of mine. They're awesome, and we have just a ton of undergrads that do the work. But we went to San Antonio this summer, and we also went to Paris. So that was a very fun trip for the World's Poultry Congress. So had a chance to hang out with the grad students there. And then, of course, our great collaborators, Anna Johnson, Yuko Sato, Mo Algazar, Billy and Danielle, amazing. And then our grant sources. So thank you so much for your time today.
All right. Do we have any questions from the audience? Or on Zoom?
Thank you for your presentation. I had a question about your seahorse assay. I know that you were looking at total PBMCs from the blood, but I was wondering if it was possible, or if you've even done it, to look at the glycolysis metabolism in different subpopulations of T cells or anything like that, if you've seen differences.
Yeah. So one of the changes that we see with vaccination or an immune stimulus is a total global change in who is around for the T cell populations. And our goal over the past year is we've been using a couple of different magnet kits to try to isolate out just T cell populations. The kits have been annoying and frustrating because we have to kind of use a sandwich technique. So we're working on making sure the cells that we get are the cells that we expect. And then we want to do the seahorse assay exactly as you said in those populations, because I think it would be different. We do have some information that we might know a couple of cell types that are driving those changes, but we want to be able to apply the challenge like just to that cell population or take it from a challenged animal. And then, yeah, so that is great. That's exactly where we're going. We're just working out the kits, as you know.
You mentioned that when birds were brought into a facility, 3 days of acclimation were not sufficient. Can you recommend what would be a reasonable amount of acclimation before you would begin an experiment?
Yeah, so the ICRIC minimum is 3, but 7 would, from an immunological standpoint, anything after 7 or after would be perfect. So it's just a little bit longer, but not too much longer. So I would recommend 7 would be a smart thing, but fully understanding that like when we bring